Stu Laurie, and this is In the Tractor Seat, brought to you by Minnesota Farmers Union. And I'm here to introduce the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the drought relief program, for which sign up just opened today. So this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to Minnesota Farmers Union's YouTube page. And please do submit your questions to the chat, and we'll get to them throughout Paul's presentation here. And if we don't get to them, you have our commitment that we'll follow up with you and get you an answer if we don't have time to get you an answer today. So without further ado, and with much appreciation for all the work that it took to put this package together and to get applications rolled out in just under a month here, I will turn it over to folks at MDA. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Stu. I really appreciate it. Quick note, so I'm Paul Huguenin. I'm the Director of Ag Marketing and Development at the Department of Agriculture. With me today are Ashley Bress and Courtney Vandermeer, and they are doing they've done all the heavy lifting in terms of implementing this, and they'll keep me on track. They'll fix what I mess up in the presentation, and they'll add anything I missed. Before I start, I want to start by saying thank you to Farmers Union, first of all, for hosting this as a way to help get the word out and answer questions for farmers, but also for everything that you did to get us to this point in terms of your work with legislators during the legislative session, before the legislative session. We greatly appreciate the partnership and greatly appreciate all the efforts of MFU staff and members throughout this process. So I am going to share my screen. All right, so hopefully you are all looking at a nice set of slides. And with that, we will dive in. So all I'm going to say is that everybody on this call got really sick and tired of looking at these maps last year, and they seem to get worse and worse as the year went. But that's why we're here. We're here to help issue payments to livestock farmers and specialty crop producers to help cover expenses that they incur. So here's a couple of the program basics, and I'll just hit these briefly, and then know that I will go into each of these first three bullets in more detail. First and foremost, this is a program to reimburse livestock farmers and specialty crop producers for expenses directly related to the drought last year. It doesn't include traditional commodity crops like corn and soybeans and wheat. So this is livestock farmers and specialty crop producers. Maximum reimbursement is $7,500 for the farm. And one thing that's important is these funds are not first come, first served. So there's an initial application deadline that I'm going to cover in detail in a moment. If we get more requests than what we have money, we will prorate all of the applications that come in during that first application window. So we'll go over that in a little more detail, but know that it's not first come, first serve, but there is a first deadline. And as farmers, you're going to want to make sure you're in time before the first deadline. The last piece of information that's important to note is this is a taxable payment. So you'll get documentation of that, but you want to keep that when you file your taxes next year. So let's take a look in a little more detail. Who is eligible? As I mentioned, livestock farmers and specialty crop producers. So the definition of a specialty crop is the USDA definition of specialty crop. Produce, nurseries, greenhouses. There's a link to that on our webpage. What is the definition of a farm? So we're using the USDA definition, which is that any place that has $1,000 or more of agricultural products produced and sold, or where they normally would have produced $1,000 of product during the year, which I think may come into play for some of the particularly specialty crop producers who had a total crop failure and may not hit the $1,000 of sales, but they still have expenses. Also important about who may apply is what counties are eligible. Almost every county in Minnesota is eligible, except 4. So the only counties that are not eligible are Goodhue, Rice, Wabasha, and Winona. Now, if you have some farmland in one of those 4 counties, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're out. So what I mean by that is, if you're a farmer and you've got your farming land in Goodhue County, but also in a county that is eligible, then you are still eligible based on the fact that you're farming, at least in part, in an eligible county. So hopefully that makes sense, but all counties eligible except those 4. One of the biggest areas of questions is always, so what expenses are eligible? First of all, the timeline. We look back to last June 1st. So before there was a disaster declaration, but when things were starting to look ugly and it became apparent to producers that, hey, this had the potential to be a very dry year that was going to require some expenses. So anything that was purchased and paid for after June 1st, 2021, and before May 23rd of this year. If you're wondering why did we pick May 23rd? Seems like an odd date. It's because the bills were passed by both House and Senate on May 22nd. So that's where we drew the line. So you've got almost a full year of eligibility for when expenses were incurred. The biggest thing, if I can get you to remember one phrase as you think about what's eligible, it's that eligible expenses are those that were incurred solely because of the drought that otherwise you wouldn't have had. We will go through some examples of what's eligible in a minute, but there are a billion potential questions people could have. Like, what if I had to go get a load of 7 round bales from a small town in South Dakota? My hired hand drove, and they are left-handed, and they drove a 1975 pickup truck. It all boils back to, did you incur the expense solely because of the drought? And it's something you wouldn't otherwise have had to do. The other thing that's really important, this is a program that reimburses actual expenses, not lost revenue. So an example would be a specialty crop producer who says, I only got half of a sweet corn crop, so my revenue is half of what it normally would have been. While that's significant, we don't reimburse on lost revenue. We reimburse for things you paid for. And as I mentioned, we'll go over some examples here in a second. For specialty crops, think of it in terms of, anything related to water, basically. Irrigation, anything that you had to do to help irrigate your crops is going to be eligible. If you had to replant, then all of the things that went into that is going to be eligible. I want to mention hired labor because that's a common question we get. If you have additional hired labor, that wasn't your own, but if you had to hire labor because of the drought. So let's say that you have hired labor anyway, but last year they needed to work more hours because they were dragging irrigation equipment around. They were doing all of those kinds of things. They had to replant, or they had other work that was beyond a normal year. So if you have additional hours of hired labor, that is an eligible expense. With livestock, the biggest thing, feed is eligible, and so is anything related. Like if you had to replant a pasture, if you put in fencing supplies so that you could graze an area that maybe you normally wouldn't graze, maybe you purchase grazing rights from a neighbor or from somewhere, those are eligible. And again, if you had hired labor beyond what you normally would, so you had to pay hired help to transport your animals to feed, or to make a drive across the country to pick up hay and bring it back, additional hired labor beyond what you normally would have hired is eligible. Transportation is eligible. There's a couple unique quirks about it, so I want to cover that. First of all, transportation is eligible, and what we're paying for is loaded miles. So we're only covering miles where you're loaded, whether that load be feed, livestock, or water. And the rate for all of those is $6 a mile. Feed is the one that gets a little bit messier. So this would reimburse you for bringing feed back to your livestock or transporting your livestock to feed. So pasture somewhere, whatever. That's limited to the first 25 loaded miles. The reason for that is because farmers can get reimbursed from FSA's ELAP program for anything over 26 miles. So that caveat comes right out of the legislative language. Also, there's that miles, if you transported your livestock to a feedlot, that's not an eligible expense. But if you're bringing feed to the livestock or livestock to a feed source, first 25 loaded miles can be reimbursed at $6 a mile. If you were in a position where you needed to reduce your herd, or even worse, if you had to liquidate your herd because of the drought, you didn't have enough feed to do it. Loaded miles transporting your livestock to the point of sale is eligible for the entire trip. So whether that was 5 miles to the auction barn or 300 miles to an auction barn or to a buyer, $6 a mile, a loaded mile for that trip. It's only livestock that you sold because of the drought. So if you normally sell, if you had a livestock as part of the normal culling your herd process, that's not eligible. But if you had to reduce your herd or liquidate your herd because of the drought, that is eligible. And then, of course, transporting water, whether that's transporting water to the livestock or transporting, bringing a water wagon full of water so you could irrigate crops, that's eligible, again, $6 per loaded mile. What are you going to need to submit your application? The application is not super long. There's multiple ways you can submit it. We've tried to keep it as simple as possible, but you'll send in an application, a list of your expenses, and I'll talk about what you need to submit in a second, but a list of your expenses and an IRS Form W-9. We need the W-9 because we're going to pay you through the state system, and so we've got to get you in there. So it's an application, the W-9, and the application includes a list of your expenses. What do you not need to send us? First of all, I mentioned that this is about expenses, not lost revenue. So we don't want your financial statements. You don't have to prove that you lost money or how much money you lost because of the drought, or what happened to your revenue because of the drought. We don't want to see that. We don't need it. So do not send in financial statements or an indication of lost revenue. We also don't need your invoices, receipts, canceled checks, bank statements, etc. Now you need to keep those. You should have a nice file with it, just like you would for your taxes anyway. So you're going to want to keep that for 6 years in case the legislative auditor decides to do an audit of this program. But don't send us those receipts. The reason for that is one of the key pieces of the language to make this process as quick as possible for producers and as quick as possible for us to be able to process your application is that the amount is based on the farmer attesting to what their actual expenses are. So I'll go over that in a minute in the application, but you don't need to send us canceled checks or anything like that. So before I move on into the how do you apply, this is a good time. Stu, do we have any questions in the chat, or do you have anything that you want to clarify?
We've got at least one. Thank you, Paul. That's helpful. From the chat, what if a farmer raises corn and livestock and spend more on hay to feed them? Is that producer eligible? I think getting into row crop producers aren't eligible, but if they raise livestock.
Yes, that really is a good question. It's okay that they also have row crops like corn, soybean, whatever. That's okay. Their eligibility is based on the expenses they incurred for their livestock, or if they also have specialty crops. So being a livestock farmer or a specialty crop farmer makes you eligible regardless of whether you do other things too. And it's pretty common. I mean, most folks are going to have multiple crops or species. So great question. Thank you.
Excellent. Good question, and good to have a simple answer too. And next question is if you can parse out a little bit more the difference between feed transportation and transportation in terms of those eligible expenses. So if someone had to buy hay at hay auction 200 miles away from the farm and pay a trucker to haul it, is that different from the transportation loaded miles calculation, or how does that play out?
That's boy, good questions from this group today. So the loaded miles, and Ashley will correct me if I'm wrong, the loaded miles refer to if you are driving, so you are incurring the expense of transporting the feed. If you purchase the feed and you paid a trucker or whoever you bought it from to transport it to you, and they said it's a flat fee of whatever, $500, and I'll get it to your farm and deliver it, then the $500 in this case is what you're eligible to get reimbursed for. Loaded miles is if you, the farmer, are picking up the hay or driving your livestock to feed. That's, yeah, good clarification.
That totally makes sense. So basically for transportation costs, you'll have a receipt from the trucker who you paid. For a loaded mile, you'll be attesting to MDA that you drove those miles. That makes a ton of sense. And if you got time for 2 more questions, Paul,
Sure.
before we keep moving?
Yeah.
Next one, if you sold your herd to an out-of-state buyer, for example, do those miles count for transporting your livestock, and do the miles count both ways?
Yeah, the miles will only count loaded. So if you sold, if you liquidated your herd and you drove your animals to the point of sale to whoever was buying them or to the auction, whatever, you're eligible to get $6 per loaded mile, but you don't get reimbursed for driving back empty. The other thing that people who sold animals or liquidated may run into is the fee from the auction barn, for example. That's an eligible expense. So if there's a commission, if they charged you per animal or per whatever, per lot, that is an eligible expense too.
Got it. That's super helpful. And then a final thing, it's a question I got emailed, but is about purchasing a water truck. And I think that speaks to some other infrastructure too. It's obviously you're going to use it outside of the context of the drought. It's helpful to your farm, but you bought it this year because you needed it for the drought. How do you treat a large expense like that? Another one would be drilling a well.
Yeah, those again are good questions. And that's eligible if you bought it because of the drought. And if you bought a water truck because you're in the middle of this natural. If you bought it because of the drought, then it is eligible. If you put in the well because of the drought, that's eligible. Even though you're gonna have access to use the well in years forward, you're gonna have access to the truck years forward. But as long as a farmer, you're willing to attest that the reason I did that is because of the drought of 2021, that makes it eligible. Now, you're only eligible for the $7,500. That's the maximum you can get, but that is an eligible expense. All right, well, let's take a trip through. So how do you apply? You know who's eligible and what's eligible. There are 3 ways to apply: online, by email, and by regular mail. The deadline's the same no matter what you do, July 6th, 5 o'clock. We really, really, really encourage everybody to apply online. It's in everybody's best interest to apply online. It's quicker. It's certainly quicker to process. When you fill out the forms online, it won't let you submit if you missed a required question. You're also going to get a confirmation that says you have submitted your application successfully, which is nice to know. Whereas if you send an email into the ether, you're always wondering, did it go? Who did it go to? So applying online is super helpful. The deadline is July 6th, 5 o'clock. That's the first application window. If we get more requests, then we have money. And I don't know that I mentioned, for rough math, assume there's $8 million available. If we get more requests than that, everybody who's in by the deadline will get a prorated payment. And if you miss the first deadline and all the money is chewed up with first applications, you're out of luck. And so we don't want to see emails or people trying to submit apps after 5 o'clock, because that's a missed opportunity. So hit the deadline. So we encourage you to apply online. However, you can email your application and your W-9 to us. The email is there. That's also the one you use for questions. It has to be to us by July 6th at 5 o'clock. Again, please don't wait till 4:55 and then decide you're going to find the address and hit send, and then you find out that your kid is using all of the bandwidth and your email doesn't leave until 5:15. Don't wait till the deadline, but you can email it to us if you prefer. And last resort is you can go to our webpage, you can print an application, fill it out by hand, and you can mail it to us. It has to be postmarked by July 6th. And it has to actually arrive here by July 12th. And we all know that the post office has struggled to hit some of their normal time, metrics. And so you might postmark it by July 6th. If it doesn't show up at our building before July 12th, you're still not going to be in. So again, whatever method you use, try not to wait till the last minute. And we do have that cutoff. We have to receive it by July 12th. So let's give you a little more info about applying online, just so that you've seen some of the screens. First of all, if anybody out there has already applied for, as in the past, applied for like a livestock investment grant, you've already done this. You may already have an account. If you do, you're welcome to use an account you've already created. If you forgot it, that's okay. It'll give you your password back and you can do that. And if you haven't used our system before, you can create a new account. It goes quick, it's easy. You're going to enter some basic info, like most forms. If it's got an asterisk, you have to fill it out. But this is to create your account in our online application system. If you skip something you're supposed to do, it's not going to let you. It's going to give you the big, flashing warning, and it'll tell you got to fill it out. Once you create an account, now you're going to be in as an applicant. You're going to be at this dashboard. I added the red circle here. There's a button that you're going to click at the top of this that says apply. It'll show your name here as the applicant and your organization. You click apply. That's going to take you into this list of, you'll see all of our grant programs, but at the top is going to be the Ag Drought Relief Program. Every program needs an acronym, so ours is ADROP, as in a drop in the bucket. But 2021 Ag Drought Relief Program is what you're looking for, and there's a big blue button upper right-hand corner that says apply. There are other languages, so you can apply in other languages, but you're going to hit the apply button. Then you're going to get to kind of your basic information. Who are you and where are you from? What's your address? Whether you're a livestock farm, specialty crop farm, or both. Farm county, a word about county. I think I mentioned early on, if you farm in multiple counties, you're only going to list one here. List the primary county in which you are farming, unless that county is not eligible. So if most of your farming work is done in one of those 4 counties that are not eligible, but you also farm in an eligible county, put the eligible county there. Don't list the one that's not eligible. The nice thing about applying online is it's going to automatically lead you into the IRS form W-9 so that you can get paid. That's the nice thing. If you do it otherwise, it's a separate kind of a deal. You got separate paper or whatever. But when you do it online, it's going to take you right into the IRS form W-9. One note, when you get to there, you're going to put your name and your email address. The stuff at the bottom where it says Swift data entry, it's already filled in. You skip that. That is not for you to worry about. Just leave that as you find it. Most people, I'm sure you've seen the W-9, like a lot of federal forms, not super user friendly, but we kind of highlighted the stuff you've got to have. Most people skip the part where you put what kind of a business you have. We made it so you can't skip it. So whether you're a individual or a partnership or whatever, check that box, make sure you sign. One note for folks who are part of a partnership or an LLC, we are only going to give one check per farm. So if you've got a partnership with 6 partners in it, we're only going to write you one check. So when we did the dairy with an I, those payments, we were able to match what FSA has on record. This is not that. We're just doing one check per farm. So decide who the principal operator is, and that person will fill out the form. So once you've done the W-9, now you're into the part where you get to say, okay, here's what I spent and get reimbursed for. There are 2 charts. And as I mentioned, you're not going to send us the receipts. You're just going to tell us what date did you spend the money? Who was it to? What was it for? And how much money? You don't need to add it all up and total it. We'll do it. We'd have to check it anyway. So all you have to do is date, to whom, for what, and how much money. And that's your expenses. Basically it's a giant text box and you just type it in. Transportation, I think we covered that, but it's $6 per mile, per loaded mile. So I think we hit that pretty good. We can take questions at the end if there are any. But there is a separate box for you to enter your transportation miles. So here's where you're going to put the date, how many loaded miles, and what was it for? Were you getting water? Were you taking feed to your animals? That's where this is going to go. And the reason that we on feed and livestock we're only going those first 25 loaded miles is because USDA's ELAP program covers over 25 miles. So, you know, you can't get paid for something that some other organization paid you for. And one of the key things about the legislation, which is we are very, very grateful for because it speeds up the process for the farmer and on our end, is that instead of sending receipts, the farmer is attesting and basically certifying, yes, I really am eligible. I really had these expenses because of the drought. And I'm affirming that this is true. So before you can submit online, you're going to fill out all these. You're just going to, it's a series of yeses. You just click it. There's not even an option for no, because if you click no, you're out. So you'll just have to attest to that. But that comes easy when you fill it out online. So that's online. If you want to email, again, everything starts on that web page, which is at the bottom of these slides. But if you go to the MDA homepage, that's front and center. It's going to take you to our main drought page. If you're going to apply by email, you're going to download the application. You're going to download and complete the IRS W-9. And then you're going to email it to that drought@state.mn.us inbox by July 6th at 5 o'clock. If you prefer to do it by mail, same thing. You go to the website, you print that application out, you fill it out with the W-9, and you send that back to us. It has to be postmarked by July 6th, and it has to get into this office, into our hands by July 12th. That's your address, which is also on the website. So what if there's a problem? And we know, look, there could be thousands of applicants for this. There are going to be people who miss a box or make a mistake or whatever. If there's a problem, we will notify the farmer by phone or email and say, hey, you missed this information, or you didn't fill out your address, whatever. We will notify the farm, and the farm will have 7 business days after the notification or when that window closes to fix the problems. If they don't fix the problem in that window, then they're not in that initial bucket, which means they're probably going to lose out. It's another reason to apply online, because it really reduces the chances that there's a problem with the initial app. But if there is a problem, you'll have 7 days to fix it. Or if we deny it, you put in an expense, we look at it and say, no, that's not eligible. And you're like, yes, it really is. And I can explain why. You can appeal it, and that is perfectly fine. And then you've got 7 days to appeal that, and we'll take a look at it. The website, I keep going back to the website. That's where you'll find everything you need. One other thing that's really nice is the extension really stepped up. They are allowing folks to call the farm info line. And their staff that answer that line will help people fill out their application if they've got questions. So if somebody's struggling to fill out a W-9, or they're having issues filling out, maybe they've got eligibility questions, farm information line is going to help people do that. There are some other resources as well on the web page that you'll be able to find, including once this recording is available. I think we'll have that available for folks as well. So that is a whirlwind tour of drought relief through the state of Minnesota. I want to thank you very much for being here. And again, Stu and everybody at Farmers Union, we really appreciate your partnership and hosting this webinar and everything that you have done to get us to this point where there are funds available for farmers. Know that, we will do everything we can to be both prompt and fair to everybody who applies on this. We're really trying to thread the needle here. Everybody was severely impacted by the drought. They need the check 6 months ago, right? They needed it last fall, late last summer. Well, the bill wasn't passed until the last day of session. So we're trying to thread the needle of let's process and get checks out as quickly as possible, and balance that with let's make sure farmers have enough time to get in their application, whether that's online, mail, etc. So we're really trying to walk that balancing beam and try to make that work. But know that we take this seriously, and we will do the best we can to be timely and accurate in everything we do. Last question that people normally want to know is, when do I get a check? And I would want to know that too. So we're going to do everything we can to process quickly. But one thing I want to say is we have no idea if we're going to get 1,500 requests or 15,000 requests. And how many applicants we get is going to have a lot to do with how fast we can get checks out to folks. There's only so many applications a day that our accounting folks, can issue a check for. My best guess is that first checks will be mailed out in the first week of August. Now, that doesn't mean that all checks are going to get mailed out in the first week of August, because it's going to take some time, and we're going to send them over in batches as fast as we can. But my best guess is that the first folks to get checks will be getting them in early August. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
This was excellent, Paul. Thank you so much, and totally appreciate the balance between being expeditious and getting these out as fast as you can, and fair, and recognizing that none of us put you in an easy position here. So we really appreciate all your work, your team's work, Ashley and Courtney. This is a pretty incredible effort, and really excited that we are where we are, and think that you join in for conversations like this is really helping folks understand what they need for these applications. And the bottom line, I think, is it's very simple. And it goes back to your original expenses that you wouldn't have accrued if it weren't for the drought. And that's what folks need to come up with. So thank you for that. I know we're a little past our 12:45, and I don't see any new questions. So I'll just remind folks that you can find a recording of this on Farmers Union's YouTube page. We'll be sure to get that to you, Paul, to make sure you can post it on the website. We so appreciate that. And on behalf of Kyle and Janet and folks at Farmers Union, I'll remind folks that these are monthly conversations. You can check out our Facebook and find out about topics coming up here. Final thought, don't hesitate to reach out to anyone at Farmers Union if you need help. I'm sure the same goes for MDA. But if you need help, have questions about your application, questions about expenses, eligibility, we're here for you, and just don't wait to call because the applications close on July 6th, which is just around the corner. So thank you again, Paul, and everyone for joining, and I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.